starting right now. Yeah, okay. Welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown. I'm Tom Eddlem, the Blue Collar Economist, and this is episode 26. Today we're going to talk about real estate and how the economy is rigged against you, the working person. Okay, this is the second in a series. Last week, and by last week I mean earlier this week because last week I was busy. Last week we talked about how the economy is rigged against you in war. Today we'll talk about real estate. Okay, before I do, housekeeping stuff. First, there's a Venezuela vote. There's a Venezuela war starting, apparently. The Congress just turned down a resolution telling basically President Trump, you can't go to war with Venezuela unless Congress first calls you to do so. It went down in flames because the Republican Party, Trump's party, pushed against it. You can see here, 3 Republicans voted for it, 212 against it. Democrats, 1 Democrat voted against it, but all the rest of the Democrats voted for the resolution. The resolution would have stopped the impending war on Venezuela. The 3 Republicans voting against the or for the resolution to stop the war in Venezuela were Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and a Nebraska congressman named Don Bacon. So props to you 3 because you guys actually stood up against not only stood up for the Constitution, but against your own party and the President of the United States to keep the Founding Fathers' vision of war being in the legislative branch, not the executive branch. So great to you guys. Okay. The podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. We've got a new piece out today, Wednesday, December 17th, at the Libertarian Institute on birthright citizenship, and I make the argument that it makes sense, and there's a real danger in not doing it. There's a large number of historical cases where countries let large numbers of multi-generational citizens remain in their country, who are non-citizens remain in their country generation after generation, and it always ended in devastation. And beginning with the ancient Hebrews in Egypt, the Romans with the Vandals and the Huns, the British denying the vote to the Irish in Ireland. I mean, there's just tons of examples. Obviously, South Africa, apartheid, ongoing right now in Israel and Palestine. So it's just tons of examples. It's a real practical issue that you need to do it, but also it's a principled issue. I actually take one of the people I admire, Tom Woods, to the Woods shed, if you will, but nicely. Where he actually, unlike most opponents of birthright citizenship, he actually tries to make the case that the authors of the 14th Amendment just wanted to limit it to African Americans, and that's not true. But he tries to make the case, and I refute him on that. So definitely look that up at the Libertarian Institute today. And now let's talk about not birthright citizenship. Let's talk about how the economy is rigged against you. And again, I want to stress that the overall philosophy here, the overall reality is that when 2 people agree to something in the free market, agree to an exchange, generally speaking, they both get richer. All right, as long as there's no fraud or force involved. However, if government gets involved, there's always force involved. And that generally means one person is getting richer and another person is getting poorer. Okay? And government can get involved indirectly in a transaction. And we're going to talk about that more indirectly today because we're going to talk about real estate and the impact that inflation and interest rate manipulation has had on the real estate market and how it's helped billionaires and hurt wage earners and those who are trying to get into the real estate market. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is the general theme of this I don't know how to series, I guess you would say, of podcasts that I'm doing. It'll include war, the last time, real estate, but also big pharma, the health insurance, big ag, bailouts, gatekeeping regulations. So there's going to be a series of them. The basic theme of it is trillions go to the government, billions go to the billionaires in the form of subsidies and contracts, and millions go to politicians. And that's going to be the case here as well, okay? Because there are almost no politicians fighting to abolish the Federal Reserve, abolish inflation. They all talk about getting inflation under control, but what they really mean is keeping inflation going, but keeping it to the level where the proles don't really complain about it. Okay, now let's talk about inflation. First, we should probably define it. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. It's not an increase in prices, although when you increase the amount of money in circulation and you keep the supply of goods in an economy at a constant, that's going to raise prices because you have more money chasing the same amount of goods. All right. Now, that's not always true. I mean, the amount of goods in the economy in our modern society, generally speaking, is always increasing, except 2020 when we shut down the economy, except during World War II and a couple of, there's a few exceptions, but generally speaking, the amount of goods is always going up. So in many instances, you can actually increase the supply of money and prices stay the same, or even go down, and that's what happened in the 19th century in the United States. They increased the supply of money, but the supply of goods increased faster. So what happened was the price of goods actually fell by 50%, even as wages were doubling. So wages doubled and prices fell by half. So that meant wages actually increased roughly fourfold, okay, if you account for the fall in prices in the 19th century. And why is that? Because the dollar was backed by gold. And even though the amount of gold increased, the supply of goods increased massively because of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution has continued. It's just that the amount of money has increased so much faster than the increase in the supply of goods that prices have gone up in almost everything except for a few tech goods like television sets. Okay. All right. So one of the things that inflation does, when you think about it, you got to think about, all right, so you increase supply of money. Well, who wins? And the classical French economist, who's of Irish heritage, he said that it's called I can't think of the guy's name, but the point is, he said those who get the money first, benefit the most, and those who get the money last are the ones who are hurt the most. And but another way to look at it is this, and inflation, because it increases the supply of money and it pushes prices up of goods. The ones who have the goods, it doesn't matter because their prices are going to rise. Their value is going to rise in relative proportion to the amount of increase in the supply of money. Where the winners and losers are creditors and debtors. All right. If you owe money and there's massive inflation, you're going to be better off because it's going to be easier to pay off your debt. Like my friend from Venezuela, I've told the story before. I think I've told it on this podcast. He bought a house in 2011, came to the United States in 2015. A couple of years later, his wife said, "Hey, honey, our monthly payment went from $250 a month." Keep in mind, this is Venezuelan money, bolivars. So it was roughly a 10-to-1 thing. He said it went from $250 a month to less than $1 a month. And why? Because there was massive inflation. So basically, my friend got a house for free in Venezuela, okay, as a result of inflation. And that happens with everybody in the United States. I mean, I remember when I moved out of my house, out of my parents' house in 1989, I went to Wisconsin. I looked at an apartment. I got an apartment. I said, Dad, I got this great apartment. It's right across the street right across the river from Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. And the mortgage is only $290 a month. And the old man went white. He said, that's more than my mortgage. It was 1989, okay? But he had bought his house in 1971 before all of the big inflation of the 1970s and early 80s. So his mortgage was very low compared to, like, his mortgage had largely been paid off because of inflation. So it happens in the United States a little bit slower than that. And of course, since then, a little bit slower still. But inflation helps those who are in debt, all right? And I'm going to get into a specific example of how that, but it hurts those who are creditors. And you might think, oh, well, poor people are the ones most in debt. Rich people have the most, are the ones with the, who give the most credit, but that's not true. All right. As a general rule, rich people have the most debt because they have the most credit. And poor people, the poorest of the poor, working poor, all they have is their wages, and their wages are credit. Their wages are credit because they work this week and they wait until payday. They loan their employer their wages until they get paid. So maybe they wait a week, maybe they wait 2, maybe they wait 3 weeks or whatever if they get paid monthly. A couple people are day laborers, so they get paid at the end of the day. But generally, they're creditors. Also, renters, right? What's the landlord's first thing? If you go and rent an apartment, I remember the first thing when I went out in 1989. He said, first, last, and Social Security and security deposit. All right. I had to loan my landlord the first month, the last month, and a security deposit, which was the equivalent of a third month, before I could even live in the place. I was crediting my landlord with my rent. And that was all eaten away by inflation during the time I was renting. All right. So the wage earner typically is a huge creditor and has the poorer he has, the less he has as far as, in order to be a debtor, you have to actually have a credit. He has his wages as credit. He has his rent as credit. And when he takes his wages, what does he do? He runs to the bank and he puts it in the bank in his checking account. Well, he's crediting the bank with his wages as well until he spends it. So everything he's got is a credit. So it hurts the wage earner. And let me go into a little bit more specifics about that too, because and give you an example of how that works. All right. Now, just so you know, in 2019, I hope you can see this chart. It shows there's a tremendous increase, or not 2019, in 2020 and 2021, there's a tremendous increase in the amount of money in circulation in the United States. This was done electronically by the Federal Reserve. And, a lot of times the presidents like to say, Biden liked to say, I brought inflation under control. Trump's saying, I brought inflation under control. And by that, they mean, well, we want to keep it to 3%, stealing from the wage earners 3% every year forever. But really, they have no control over it whatsoever. They're just stupidly applauding the Federal Reserve from the sidelines. They don't have any control. All of this money, this increase in the money supply, was a result of the Federal Reserve Bank increasing the supply of money digitally, because they can't legally print it. That has to be the Bureau of Printing and Engraving. But they increased digitally how much money was in circulation. And if you look, you can see it went up by about 40% during 2020 and 2021. All right. And what you see is the result of that is here are median wages. Now you can see there's a huge spike in late 2020. And why is that? Because these are median wages. All right. So it's the 50th percentile of people earning wages 16 and up. And it went up because the non-essential workers were told to stay home. So they weren't earning wages. They were out of the market. So generally speaking, the people who remained in the market were a little bit higher earners. So there was this little spike. But if you look at the number from the third quarter of 2020, where the spike had come down, where people had gone back to work, it's at, on the scale here, it's 376. And then from there, the wages continued to fall for about 2 years. Why? Because the prices continue to go up, and the wage earners had to bargain to get their wages increased. I know that a lot of, like, my wife's a teacher. It took a while for her to, when inflation in 2022 was 8%, she was already on the contract just to get, I think, a 2.5% or 3% increase. So she lost ground there with her wages until she could bargain and get it back up to where it was. And really, if you look at the wages, 276 on the scale just finished, the wages just got up to there at the very last moment here in the second and third quarters of 2025, the last pieces of data. So from the third quarter of 2022, the third quarter of 2025, there were no increases in wages, and there was a huge cut during that time. This is one of those empirical examples of how inflation can cut wages. Okay. Got you there. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is interest rate manipulation. The Federal Reserve Bank, there's one chart I wish I'd given you, prepared, but the Federal Reserve Bank suppressed the interest rate as a general rule with 1 or 2 years exception from the year 2000 till 2022. And basically what they did was they kept the interest rate at 1% or 0% for the entire time, except 2006, right before the great crash. And what happened was all of the asset prices increased. The stock market increased, commodities increased, and real estate more than doubled over and above inflation. Okay. Well, it doubled over and above inflation, maybe not more than doubled. It was maybe 90% increase over and above inflation. So you have this massive increase in real estate. Okay. In real estate prices. And everybody knows this. All right. And what's the result of that for a poor 26-year-old trying to get into the housing market? It means they have to pay twice as much sticker price for housing. And now in 2022, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates back up to normal rates, and the sticker prices are still high. So as a result, he's not only paying $750,000 for a house that probably in 2000 would have been worth, even adjusted back for inflation, maybe $350,000. Now he's paying higher interest rates for it too. And the Gen Z and the Gen Y people are really having a tough time getting into housing. So that right there is a loss for Gen Y, Gen Z of maybe $300,000, $400,000. And those losses are not for free. They are transferred from them to somebody else. Just as the losses from inflation, I'm going to go into the losses from inflation in a minute. They are not for free. All right. They are transferred from one to another. When the government gets involved and uses force, one person gets richer and another person gets poorer. And that's what's happened with inflation, and that's what happens with interest rate manipulation. Okay, so let's take an example of a billionaire real estate developer, okay? Here's a real estate developer. He's got $1 billion. What is he going to do? He wants to optimally invest his money in the real estate market, okay? So he's got $1 billion. What's he going to do? He's going to buy $5 billion worth of property, all right? So in the end, he's got, if you look on I've got a graph here for those of you guys listening. He's got a total investment of $5 billion. He's got $1 billion in equity, 20%, so he doesn't have to pay that PMI or anything on any of his loans. And he's got $4 billion in mortgage debt. Well, if there's 3% inflation, $4 billion times 3% is $120 million of mortgage forgiveness every year. That's a lot. I mean, it's $120 million is 12% of what he owns, right? He owns $1 billion and he's getting $120 million a year more. But that's only the beginning, my friends. That's only the beginning. Okay. Let's say what happens. He does this in 2020. All right. He's got $1 billion. He does this. He buys the $5 billion worth of properties. And guess what? The property price doubles. I'm not counting. This is over and above inflation. All right. We're using inflation index numbers. What happens? Okay. He's still got the same $4 billion in mortgage debt, but now his properties have gone from $5 billion to $10 billion. So now he's not a $1 billionaire. He's a $6 billionaire. Just by owning the properties, just because the interest rate got lowered and the sticker price of all the properties went up, because the market price for property is not the sticker price, it's the monthly payment. Almost nobody, including billionaires, pays cash for a piece of real estate. They almost always mortgage it. And the inflation is one of the reasons why they do it. So when you lower the interest rate, the sticker price has to go up. When you raise the interest rate, the sticker price has to fall. And that's what's been happening, by the way, since 2022. Okay. So he's gone from a $1 billionaire to a $6 billionaire. Okay. That doesn't come for free. That wealth came from somebody. It came from the wage earner. It came from the renter. It came from the checking deposit holder. All right. Now, let's say he's got the $6 billion in 2022. What's he going to do? Is he going to keep the money like this? No, he wants to reinvest it optimally, right? So what he does is he takes the $6 billion and he buys $30 billion worth of properties, right? Because he wants the 20% equity, and he's got $24 billion worth of mortgage debt, and it's wonderful, all right? He's still got $6 billion, but now he holds title to $30 billion worth of property. Well, what happens in 2022 when inflation goes up to 8% from 3%? He's not, in the old scenario, he got $20 million in mortgage forgiveness from the 3% inflation on the $4 billion in mortgage debt. But now he's got $24 billion in mortgage debt, and the inflation rate is more than doubled, almost tripled to 8%. Well, what happens is he gets almost $2 billion in mortgage forgiveness. Is $1.96 billion just from inflation that 1 year. So now he becomes essentially an 8 billionaire, right? Just in that 1 year. Where's that value come from? It doesn't come for free because there's no production. It's the same property. He hasn't added to it. It's all a ledger trick. And it's a ledger trick against the working people. It's a ledger trick against the renter. It's a ledger trick against check depositors. Anyone who's a creditor, a net creditor in society. Okay, that's how it works. Now, you might say, okay, well, give me a practical example of that. Like, are real estate developers really getting richer? All right. Here's a one of the wealthier real estate developers in Southern California, Donald Bren. And if you look, I just grabbed a Google Google AI overview here from whatever the Google AI is. I forget it. It's terrible, but his net worth was about $4 billion in 2000. All right. He's a real estate developer. By 2025, it's 19.2 billion. So he increased it roughly fivefold because of the mortgage tricks. All right. It's not that his renters paid off his mortgage on the $4 billion. I mean, then he would, no, that's not it. It's these tricks. And, one of the, did I use this story? Let me see. I think this is it. Nope, that's it. Anyway, those are the story. That's what I wanted to show you. That like there's a practical. practical effect of it as well. And if you look at Warren Buffett, he's got some real estate holdings and such. His wealth has gone up. Many of the real estate developers, their wealth has gone up, and it's been largely because of these tricks that the Federal Reserve has done. Now, I'm not blaming Richard Bren or Donald Bren. I'm not blaming him. I'm saying, oh, he's a bad guy for investing in real estate. He was smart, but keep in mind, his wealth got increased because government made it so that the wage earner would lose. The economy is rigged against the wage earner. It's rigged against the renter. It's rigged against anyone who's a net creditor in society. And generally speaking, the poorer you are, the more you are a net creditor. Okay. One other thing I wanted to point out as I go along with this, with the interest rate manipulation, a lot of people say, well, but we need lower interest rates because it helps the economy. No, it doesn't. It literally does not. All right. I did a story for the Libertarian Institute, and I did a podcast on this not too long ago, talking about how I couldn't find an example of lower interest rates helping the economy. I used all kinds of multivariate regressions, and I found that it was actually a net negative. And the reason is, if you lower interest rates, that lowers your rate of return, the rate of return for an investor, right? I mean, and if you ask the average person, okay, well, I have two opportunities for you here. They're both the same amount of risk. One gets you 5%, one gets you 8% return. Which one do you want? And the answer is, well, I want the 8%, right? But the 8%, if you lower interest rates in the United States, well, then you go to Australia, you go to Singapore, you go to some other place where they haven't lowered interest rates. So it chases capital abroad. So while the asset prices go up, it doesn't actually help the economy. All right. And the interesting thing is, it does soak up a lot of the credit. When the asset prices go up, it takes the same amount of credit to finance $1 million house as it does two $500,000 houses. So if the price of real estate doubles, then the available credit can only finance half as many houses, unless you increase the amount of credit and increase the amount of, but the point is, it doesn't help the economy. All right. I looked at it 6 ways from Sunday. You can check that out over at the Libertarian Institute. If you think it helps the economy, trust me, you're mistaken, and you should really look into it. Okay. That's basically what I had for the podcast. Next Wednesday is Christmas Eve, so I will not be broadcasting at 8:30 at Christmas Eve. I'll be looking for Santa and hoping he's good to me. I will, however, have a podcast for you sometime during the week to make up for the loss, as I did last week. I put one out on Monday and of this week, because last week I did the Kyle Anzalone show, and then I went to my local libertarian meeting. So I was unable to do the podcast last week. So you got one Monday. Same thing's going to happen this following week because, hey, it's Christmas Eve. I'm not doing it. All right. Make sure you like, share, you subscribe, and make sure you write to your congressman and to the White House. Tell them, hey, stop this war in Venezuela that's coming. Trump's about to start his dumb war announcement, so I'm going to go listen to it. And I hope you do too. And I'm hoping that Mrs. Eddlem's not around because she doesn't like the language. And she's talking about my language, not his, not Trump's.